Good morning, everyone. Today we will start with a new topic, jaundice. So this jaundice it's a very important topic because it is the most common clinical condition which we face in a day-to-day practice. So that's why this condition becomes most important to know. So first of all, we will see what is mean by jaundice. Jaundice, it is also known as icterus, and it is a common presentation which is characterized by yellowish discoloration of skin, sclera, and mucous membrane, which results from the deposition of bilirubin. So first, you should know that jaundice it is not a disease in itself, but it is a presentation, or you can say it is a sign of some other disease. And why it occurs? It occurs because of deposition of bilirubin. So this tissue deposition it occurs only in presence of serum hyperbilirubinemia and is a sign of either liver disease or hemolytic disorder. So what is mean by jaundice? So it is a presentation, or you can say it is a sign which is characterized by yellowish discoloration of skin, sclera, and mucous membrane, and it is a sign of either liver disease or hemolytic disorder. So why hemolytic disorder? That you will get to know in next slides. This jaundice it is usually manifested in tissues with high elastic content like skin, sclera, and blood vessels, and in fluid which has high protein content like urine, sweat, semen, milk, etc. And it is manifested less in paralyzed part and edematous area. This jaundice it becomes clinically detectable when the bilirubin level is more than 3 mg per dl. Normal range for the serum bilirubin it is usually 1.2 mg per dl. So in some books you may find 1.5. In some books you may find less than 1 mg per dl is a normal range. So there is variation regarding this normal range of bilirubin. So all are correct. So roughly you can remember 1 to 1.5 it is a normal range. So more than 1.5 you can say it is an hyperbilirubinemia. So when the level of this serum bilirubin it is more than 3 mg per dl, then it becomes clinically detectable. That means it may be manifested with yellowish discoloration of skin or sclera. The next part in jaundice is production and metabolism of bilirubin. So before going to understand what is the etiology of jaundice, you should know what is the metabolism of bilirubin. So unless you know the metabolism of bilirubin, you will not understand why the etiology is there. So we will begin with production and metabolism of bilirubin. So this production and metabolism it involves three phases or three levels. One is pre-hepatic, second one is hepatic, and third one is post-hepatic. So we will see one by one. So first we will see pre-hepatic metabolism. That means how that bilirubin it is produced. So if all you know this bilirubin it is a breakdown product of heme. So what is mean by heme? All you know, there is no need to explain what is mean by heme. So bilirubin basically it is a product of breakdown of heme part. So in our body in a healthy individual, nearly 250 to 300 mg of bilirubin produced each day. Means in one day, nearly 250 to 300 mg of bilirubin is produced. Out of this 250 to 300 mg, nearly 70 to 80% of bilirubin it is derived from breakdown of hemoglobin in senescent red blood cells. So senescent red blood cells means what? All you know. So RBCs which are senile, that means they have completed their lifespan So those RBCs they get destructed in reticuloendothelial cells. So from this destruction of these senescent RBCs, nearly 80% of bilirubin is produced, and remaining 30 to 20% uh, it usually comes from muscle myoglobin and cytochromes. So cytochromes, it is nothing but an protein which is usually involved in providing energy, right? So remaining 30 to 80%, sorry, 20 to 30%, it comes from this two parts, that is muscle myoglobin and cytochrome. Formation of bilirubin, it occurs in reticuloendothelial cells, so that is obvious because all you know that phagocytosis, or you can say destruction of RBCs, it usually occurs in reticuloendothelial cells. So this is a diagram which usually uh, you can say reflects the overall production and metabolism of jaundice, or you can say bilirubin. So in this diagram you can see uh, here. So there is a heme part. So this heme part, it gets break down, or you can say roughly you can say when the hemoglobin it is phagocytosed in reticuloendothelial cells, two portions are released. One is hemoglobin and second one is globin part. So all this I will explain in the next slide. So this hemoglobin, it is phagocytosed by the macrophages, and they split into its heme part and globin portions. So this globin portion, it is again degraded into the amino acid, and it has no role in jaundice. So remember this globin part, it has no role in the jaundice. So only the heme part of hemoglobin, it has role in jaundice. So this heme molecule, it again undergoes two reaction. One is oxidation and second one is reaction. So first one is oxidation. So all you know what is mean by oxidation. So this oxidation reaction, it is usually catalyzed by an enzyme in oxygenase, which results in biliverdin. So when heme part it gets oxidized, it will convert into the biliverdin, which is a green color pigment, and iron and carbon monoxide. So after oxidation of this heme part, in the first step, it will result into the conversion, or you can say the production of biliverdin, iron and carbon monoxide. So this biliverdin, it is usually a green color pigment, and it is usually catalyzed by heme oxygenase, which is an enzyme. So in the next step, after this production of biliverdin, this biliverdin product, it gets reduced, that means reduction to a yellow color pigment that is called as bilirubin by an enzyme biliverdin reductase. So when biliverdin is produced, this biliverdin, it is again converted into the bilirubin by an enzyme biliverdin reductase through a process, a chemical reaction, that is reduction. So all you know what is mean by oxidation reduction. So through the chemical reaction of this reduction, that biliverdin, it gets converted to the bilirubin, which is an yellow color pigment. So biliverdin, it is a green color pigment, whereas bilirubin, it is a yellow color pigment. So this form bilirubin, so bilirubin which is formed by these two chemical reaction, it is usually called as unconjugated or free bilirubin or indirect bilirubin. So the bilirubin which is formed after these two chemical reaction, it is usually considered as unconjugated bilirubin. Now after formation of this unconjugated bilirubin, what happens we will see next slide. So this bilirubin, it is virtually insoluble in water. So the bilirubin which is formed after this two chemical reaction, it is virtually insoluble in water. That means it is basically a lipid soluble and it cannot be soluble in water. And this is insoluble in water. It is special because of hydrogen bonds which are present. So if this bilirubin it has to be transported to the liver, right? So how it will get transported, and it is not soluble in water. So to complete this process, or you can say to transport this bilirubin to the liver, this bilirubin it should be solubilized, and it is accomplished by binding of bilirubin to the albumin. So remember one thing, it is not still soluble in water, it is still insoluble in water, but to facilitate its transport towards liver, it gets bind to the albumin and hence it is transported to the liver. So this unconjugated bilirubin albumin complex, it is transported to the liver. So word is unconjugated because conjugation usually occurs in liver, right? So till now it has not gone under the process of conjugation, so it is still unconjugated. So this unconjugated bilirubin it binds with albumin, which forms unconjugated bilirubin albumin complex, and this complex it gets transported to the liver. There means at liver. Only the liver is taken up by the hepatocytes and not the albumin. So means out of this albumin bilirubin complex, only bilirubin it is taken up by the hepatocytes and not the albumin. So in hepatocytes, uh, that is in cytosol, this bilirubin, this unconjugated bilirubin, it forms, or you can say it binds with number of proteins, including uh, glutathione S transferase family. So after entering into the hepatocytes, so in cytosol, this unconjugated bilirubin it binds with proteins like glutathione S transferase family. So what is the role of this proteins? So first, after binding with this protein, this bilirubin will not efflux back into the serum, right? So first जो इसका इम्पोर्टेंस है वो ये है कि ये जो अनकॉन्जुगेटेड बिलिरुबिन है वो फिर से रिवर्स नहीं हो पाएगा इनटू द सीरम, एंड सेकेंडली it will present for the conjugation of bilirubin. So that means after binding with this protein, this unconjugated bilirubin it will get presented for the conjugation. So one is it will prevent the efflux of this serum, efflux of this bilirubin into the serum, and secondly it will present this unconjugated bilirubin for the conjugation. Now after that, in endoplasmic reticulum, the bilirubin it is solubilized by the conjugation to the glucuronic acid. So at this level, or after this reaction, what will happen, that unconjugated bilirubin which was first insoluble in water now will become soluble in water. That is, it will have hydrophilic form. So as we all know, previously it was insoluble in water, but after this reaction, that unconjugated bilirubin it will become soluble in water, because during this process or after this process, that hydrogen bonds they are disrupted, and hence this insoluble bilirubin it will become soluble in water. Now after this, there is again conjugation of glucuronic acid to the bilirubin, and which is catalyzed by bilirubin uridine diphosphate glucuronyl transferase. So you can remember the shortcut, that is UDPGT enzyme. So this is an enzyme which is usually responsible for the conjugation of glucuronic acid to the bilirubin. So you should remember this gene, because it will come again and again in the next slides, or you can see in the etiological part. So if patient will have, or if there is a deficiency or defective UDPGT, what will happen? There will not be conjugation of this bilirubin. Alright, so this is a defect and which will lead to the unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So that is a different part. So that we will see later on. But this enzyme UDPGT, it has an essential role in the conjugation of bilirubin. Now this conjugated bilirubin, which is now a water soluble bilirubin, it is then excreted into the bile drains into the duodenum and it passes unchanged through the small bowel. So after its conjugation, it is excreted in the bile drains, which passes unchanged through small bowel. So this is again a diagram which usually covers whole of the production and metabolism of this bilirubin. So here you can see here. So nearly 70 to 80% usually the bilirubin usually comes from the breakdown of senescent RBC, and remaining comes from muscle myoglobin and cytochromes and sometimes ineffective erythropoiesis. So that we will see later on in the etiological part. So after the breakdown of it, what you get? Biliverdin. So biliverdin, which is then converted into the bilirubin. Then bilirubin it binds with albumin. So that is an albumin bilirubin complex, and this albumin bilirubin complex then it is transported to the liver. So in liver, what happens? That has been explained here. So this is again a diagram which shows basically the cytosol part and endoplasmic reticulum. So it will become easy to remember the metabolism of this bilirubin. Now what happens after that? So till now we have seen that after conjugation of bilirubin, it was excreted into the bile ducts, into the duodenum, and which was passing unchanged through the proximal small bowel. So this conjugated bilirubin, it is not taken up by the intestinal mucosa. When this conjugated bilirubin, it reaches to the distal ileum and colon. So in previous slide we have seen that conjugated bilirubin, it passes unchanged in the proximal small bowel. So when it reaches in the distal part, in the ileum and colon, now it will get hydrolyzed to unconjugated bilirubin by bacterial glucuronidases. So now in the distal ileum and colon, this conjugated bilirubin, it was again hydrolyzed to the unconjugated bilirubin by bacterial glucuronidases. And now after this unconjugated bilirubin is again reduced by normal gut flora to the urobilinogens. Means what is happening here? First there was conjugation of bilirubin in intestine. This conjugated bilirubin, it was again hydrolyzed to the unconjugated bilirubin, and now this unconjugated bilirubin, it was reduced to the urobilinogens or urobilinogens by normal gut bacteria. So this diagram, it just shows the distal ileum, so where this reaction is happening. Now after this, what is happening? So nearly 80% to the 90% of urobilinogen, it is excreted in the feces either unchanged. So that means whole of the urobilinogen it is excreted, or this urobilinogen it gets oxidized to a orange color derivatives that is called as urobilins. The remaining 10% to 20% of urobilinogens, they are passively absorbed and later on they enter into the portal venous blood and are re-excreted by the liver. So nearly 80% to 90% it is excreted unchanged, and remaining 10 to 20% it gets reabsorbed and it gets absorbed and re-excreted by the liver. A small fraction, usually 3 mg per dl, it escapes hepatic uptake, it filters across the renal glomerulus and it's excreted in the urine. So in short, you can remember 80 to 90% it gets excreted through the feces, 10 to 20% it gets passively absorbed and re-excreted by the liver, and some small fraction, or you can say roughly less than 3 mg per dl, it is excreted in the urine. So this is all about the production, metabolism and transport of bilirubin. Now we will see the classification of this jaundice, and as well as along with this classification we will also see what is the etiology for this condition. So it is again divided into three parts: pre-hepatic, hepatic and post-hepatic, or also called as cholestatic or obstructive jaundice. So first we will see the pre-hepatic jaundice. So pre-hepatic jaundice, it is usually characterized by increased bilirubin production, so which is usually seen in hemolysis. So as we all know, if there is a deposition of bilirubin, so this deposition, it may be because of its increased production, or it may be because of its decreased transport or excretion. So here in pre-hepatic phase, what is happening? There is an increased bilirubin production. So when the bilirubin production will be increased if there is an hemolysis, because in previous slides we have seen bilirubin comes from the breakdown of heme part. So heme comes or heme, which is a portion of hemoglobin, and hemoglobin, it is usually present in RBCs, right? So if there is an hemolysis, that means there is a breakdown of red blood cells. What will happen? More hemoglobin will be released, and if this hemoglobin, when it gets phagocytosed in reticuloendothelial cells, bilirubin will be produced, right? So that's why hemolysis, it is the main reason here for the increased bilirubin production. This hemolysis, it may be intravascular or it may be extravascular. So hemolysis, it may be intravascular, that means within vessels, and it may be extravascular, that means outside of the vessels. So the reason for intravascular hemolysis is first one, G6PD deficiency. So I have used shortcut here, and the long form of these shortcuts I have mentioned below. So what is the G6PD? It is a glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase. So basically, this is an enzyme which is usually have a role in supplying or it supplies the reducing energy to the RBCs, and it prevents basically the oxidative stress. So if oxidative stress is more in red blood cells, what will happen? They will undergo destruction, and if they will undergo destruction, what will happen? There will be more bilirubin production. So if G6PD, or a person which has deficiency of this G6 PD enzyme, what will happen? That RBC, they are unable to tolerate this oxidative stress, and if they cannot tolerate this oxidative stress, they will undergo destruction, and that will again cause bilirubin production. If patient has normal G6PD enzyme, so what will happen? This G6PD enzyme, it will prevent these red blood cells from oxidative stress, and there will not be any breakdown of RBCs. So that's why G6PD, it is the main, or you can say one of the most common reason for intravascular hemolysis. Then second one is PNH. So what is mean by PNH? Paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobin urea. So PNH stands for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobin urea. So this is again a rare disorder which is usually characterized by defective DAF. So what is DAF? So DAF is nothing but an decaying, accelerating factor. So this decaying accelerating factor, it is nothing but an surface protein. So surface protein, uh, you can understand. So this surface protein, it usually resides on surface of RBCs, that is red blood cells. So it resides, or it is a part of surface of red blood cells. So this DAF, that is decaying accelerating factor, it is usually responsible for prevention of RBCs through, or you can say from, complement attack, or you can say innate immunity. So normally what happens if there is an immunological response against RBCs. So this immunological response, it is usually controlled by this DAF, or you can say this factor, it usually prevents immunological response against RBCs. So it is a protective factor. If this DAF is defective, what will happen? Our innate immune system will start attacking our RBCs, that is red blood cells, and it will cause more bilirubin production. This defective DAF, it usually occurs because of mutation of PIG-A gene. So long form of PIG-A gene I have mentioned in the bracket here, so you can read. The next reason is malaria, that we all know. Next is blood transfusion. So it usually occurs when Rh negative patient, it receives Rh positive blood. So basically it is an incompatibility mismatch, you can say. So if there is an incompatibility of this ABO system, that will cause intravascular hemolysis, because if Rh negative patient gets Rh positive blood, so what will happen within 24 hours? Rh negative blood will produce antibodies against Rh positive, so that will cause hemolysis. Then ineffective erythropoiesis, so that is usually seen in folate deficiency. So, and it is usually seen when there is an enucleation of RBCs. The next one is extravascular hemolysis. So extra reasons for extravascular hemolysis include pneumonia, PT, that is pulmonary thromboembolism, resorption of hematomas, hemoglobinopathies like sickle cell disease. In particular, the bone marrow, it is capable of sustained eightfold increase in erythrocyte production in response to the hemolytic stress. So that means what? If there is an hemolysis, so whenever our body sensitizes hemolysis, what will happen? Bone marrow, it has capacity to increase its erythrocyte production in sustained eightfold increase. So therefore, hemolysis alone, it cannot result in sustained hyperbilirubinemia. That is because whenever there is hemolytic stress, bone marrow will increase erythrocyte production by eightfold. So obviously, if one RBC is destroyed, what will happen? New 8 RBCs are produced. So this hemolytic stress, it is usually, you can say, covered by this erythrocyte production by bone marrow, and that is the reason when sustained hyperbilirubinemia of more than 4 mg per dl is not seen in this hemolytic disorder. Higher values, they imply concomitant hepatic dysfunction. That means if this serum hyperbilirubinemia, it is more than 4 mg per dl, that means there is then some concomitant hepatic dysfunction. When hemolysis, it is the only abnormality in an otherwise healthy individual, the result is purely unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So that is obvious, because all we know the conjugation of bilirubin, it occurs in liver, right? So here RBCs are destroyed, that means there is a hemolysis. So what will happen because of hemolysis? More unconjugated bilirubin will be produced, and that will cause unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. If there is a prolonged hemolysis, it will lead to the precipitation of bilirubin salts within the gallbladder biliary tree, which results in formation of gallstones. So ultimately, what will happen if there is prolonged hemolysis? There will be precipitation of bilirubin salts within the gallbladder, and there will be formation of gallstone. So such stones, they may lead to the acute or chronic cholecystitis, biliary obstruction, or any other biliary tract consequences of calculus diseases. Now the second part, or you can say second, hepatic jaundice. So here you can understand of what will happen here. So in hepatic jaundice, the first reason is decreased hepatocellular uptake. That means what? Uh, Bilirubin is produced outside of this liver through senescent RBCs, but liver is not taking this produced bilirubin. So liver is not allowing this bilirubin to enter into the hepatocyte. So what will happen? Again, there will be increase in unconjugated bilirubin. So remember this thing. Even though the word is hepatic jaundice here, so you may consider that there can be conjugated hyperbilirubinemia, but you should remember this, that in hepatic jaundice also there can be unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So when if there is a decreased hepatocellular uptake, so if unconjugated bilirubin, it will not enter into the hepatocyte. So what will happen? There will be increase in unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So this will happen if a patient is taking drugs like rifampicin. So rifampicin, all you know, which is an antibiotic, or you can say a part of anti-tubercular treatment. Then probenecid, which is again a drug which is used for the treatment of hyperuricemia, and ribavirin, which is again an antiviral drug used for the treatment of hepatitis C virus. So these are the drugs which are usually considered to be the hepatotoxic, or which has some effect on hepatocytes, and because of this, these hepatocytes, they are unable to take this unconjugated bilirubin. The next condition is Gilbert syndrome, which is again a rare genetic disorder which usually occurs because of mutation of UGT1A1 gene. Again, the long form of this UGT1 gene I have mentioned below. So this Gilbert syndrome, it occurs because of mutation of this gene. So why? Because this gene, it usually involved in the activity of UDPGT. So what is mean by UDPGT? That we have already seen in the metabolism of bilirubin. So this UDPGT, it is an enzyme which is usually responsible for conjugation of bilirubin. So in Gilbert syndrome, what will happen? The activity of this UDPGT is decreased because of mutation of this UGT1A1 gene. So what will happen if activity of this UDPGT will decrease? If decrease, there will not be conjugation of bilirubin, and what will happen? Because of no conjugation of bilirubin, there is increased unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia. So these are the two conditions which are responsible for unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, or you can say they are involved in decreased hepatocellular uptake. Then in hepatic jaundice, second condition is decreased conjugation. That means conjugation of bilirubin, it is decreased. So in that first one is Gilbert syndrome that just we have seen. Second one is CJ syndrome, that is Crigler-Najjar syndrome, both 1 and 2. So it is again involved in the mutation of UGT1A1 gene. So what is meant by UGT1A1 gene? So that just we have seen. Then drugs like indinavir, so which is used for the treatment of HIV/AIDS and physiological jaundice of newborn. So this physiological jaundice I will explain in detail in next slide. So all we know, the bilirubin which is produced in the fetus, it is usually cleared by placenta and eliminated by the maternal liver. So not by the fetal liver, it is usually eliminated by the maternal liver. So I am using word fetus here, so don't be confused by maternal liver. But after birth, the neonatal liver, it must take the responsibility for the bilirubin clearance and excretion. So that is normal because now there is no placenta and no maternal liver to carry out this physiological process. So after birth, neonatal liver, it must take the responsibility for the bilirubin clearance and excretion. But many hepatic physiological processes, they are incompletely developed at birth. So that means immediately after birth, that liver is not capable to carry out all his physiological processes. That is because it is an incompletely developed. So what will happen because of this? This neonatal liver is not able to clear out this bilirubin. Again, the levels of UGT1A1 are low. So what is UGT1A1? That just we have seen in the previous slide. And because of this, there is an alternative axillary pathway is formed, which allows the passage of unconjugated bilirubin into the gut. So in physiology, or you can say in bilirubin metabolism, we have seen the bilirubin which is formed in reticuloendothelial cell, it was coming to the liver for the conjugation, and from liver it was entering into the gut. But in uh, you can say neonates, what is happening? Liver is underdeveloped, levels of UGT1A1 are low, and because of this, alternating pathways are created which allows the passage of unconjugated bilirubin into the gut. That means it is bypassing the liver, you can say, and there is no conjugation of bilirubin into the liver. So only unconjugated bilirubin you will get into the gut. Again, this gut, or you can say intestinal flora, which converts bilirubin to the urobilinogen that we have seen, it is again underdeveloped, or you can say undeveloped. So again, liver, it is also poorly developed, and again intestinal flora, it is also undeveloped. So because of this, what happens? There is an enterohepatic circulation of unconjugated bilirubin ensures. So as a consequence of this, most neonates, they develop mild unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia between 2 days and 5 days after birth. The peak levels, they are typically 5 to 10 mg per dl, and they decline to the normal adult concentrations within 2 weeks. So even if patient has unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, it will come to the normal within next 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks the mechanism which is required for bilirubin deposition, it gets mature. A rapidly rising unconjugated bilirubin concentration or absolute levels of more than 20 mg per dl, it puts the infant at risk of bilirubin encephalopathy. That means first on second day the bilirubin level was 5, then it becomes 10, or on next day it becomes 12, and later on 15. So this is what it is, an rapidly rising levels of this unconjugated bilirubin. So this is a risk for bilirubin encephalopathy. Or again, if there is an absolute level, that is bilirubin, it is more than 20 mg per dl, it will put the infant at the risk of encephalopathy or Kernicterus. So under these conditions, what will happen? Bilirubin, it will cross the immature blood brain barrier. So in infant, or you can say in neonate, the liver, it was again undeveloped, gut flora, it is also undeveloped, and again the blood brain barrier, it is also undeveloped, so which is again an immature. So right, so because of this, what is happening here? This bilirubin, it will easily cross this blood brain barrier, and it will precipitate in the basal ganglia and areas of brain. And if this happen, what will happen? Their patient may have some neurological deficit like learning disability and to the death. So that means some neonates, they may die because of this encephalopathy. The treatment for this includes phototherapy, so that we will not see here. So the third part is decreased transport. So in hepatic jaundice, first there was decreased hepatocellular uptake. Second, there was decreased conjugation, and now there is decreased transport. Now, so this transport, it may be seen in congenital hyperbilirubinemia. So congenital hyperbilirubinemia, it is usually seen in a Dubin-Johnson syndrome. So this Dubin-Johnson syndrome, which is usually seen because of defective MRP. So what is the long form of MRP? That just I have mentioned here. So this MRP, that is multi-drug resistance associated protein. So this protein, it is usually involved in the transport of molecules through the canalicular membrane in hepatocytes. So now you can understand. So this protein, it is usually involved in the transport of bilirubin. So if MRP is defective, what will happen? There will not be proper transport of this bilirubin, and it will not enter into the, you can say, duodenum, and it is not excreted. So what will happen? It will deposit into the liver itself. Then second one is Rotor syndrome. So this Rotor syndrome, it is again somewhat similar to the Dubin-Johnson, and it occurs because of mutation of SCLO1B1, that is SCLO1B1 and SCLO1B3 genes. So the long form that I have mentioned below. This gene, they encodes the anion transporter protein. So this gene, they are involved in the encoding of these two proteins, OATP1B1 and B3 proteins. So these are the proteins which are again involved in the transport of bilirubin from the blood to the liver. So that means when bilirubin is produced in the reticuloendothelial cells, it was transported to the liver. So suppose here is an hepatocytes and here is the blood. So from this blood, the bilirubin is taken up into the hepatocytes by this protein. So if these proteins, they are defective, so what will happen? Bilirubin from this side, it will not enter into the hepatocytes. So that is again cause hyperbilirubinemia. The next one is acute or subacute hepatocellular diseases, so which may be viral infection of liver cells, that is all A to E hepatitis viruses, hepatitis A, B, C, right? So all these are the viruses. Then Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, or herpes simplex virus. So all these are the infections which can cause hepatocellular injury. Then hepatotoxins, which includes ethanol, so all you know about ethanol. Then there are certain drugs like acetaminophen INH, that is isoniazid, which is used in the treatment of tuberculosis. Then phenytoin, which is used for the treatment of seizures. So all these drugs, they are dose dependent. Means if patient is taking more, there are chances of having hepatocellular injury. If the dose is low, there are less chances of having hepatocellular injury. So that is dose dependent. Then ischemia. So ischemia, it may be because of hypotension. It may be because of Budd-Chiari syndrome. That means there is an occlusion of hepatic veins, and this occlusion, it may be because of thrombosis of tumor. And next is hepatic veno-occlusive disease, and lastly the metabolic disorders like Wilson disease. So what is mean by Wilson disease? All you know, So there is an excessive deposition of copper in the tissues. So if liver gets involved, again it will have some hepatocellular injury. So that is again a reason for decreased transport. Then chronic hepatocellular disease. So in first side we have seen acute. So in chronic, again viral hepatitis. So mostly B, C, and D. Alcohol consumption, hepatotoxins, which includes vinyl chloride. So this vinyl chloride, it is basically a colorless inflammable gas which is used to make various products like PVC pipes, wires, and plastic kitchen ware. So whenever there is inhalation of this vinyl chloride, it will cause hepatic injury or hepatocytes injury. So that will again lead to the hyperbilirubinemia. And next one is vitamin A hypervitaminosis. That means excessive consumption of vitamin A. So all you know, liver is high in vitamin A. That means vitamin A, it is usually stored in liver. So what will happen if there is hypervitaminosis, that is more consumption of vitamin A, it will directly affect liver cells. So that's why hypervitaminosis, it can be the cause of jaundice, then autoimmune hepatitis, and lastly the metabolic conditions like Wilson disease, that just we have seen, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, and hemochromatosis. So hemochromatosis means what? Whenever there is an iron overload and which cause tissue damage, then it is called as hemochromatosis. So these are the few metabolic diseases which can cause hepatocellular injuries. Now the third one is obstructive or cholestatic jaundice. So first we have seen prehepatic, second one is hepatic, and third one is obstructive, or somewhere it has been written as post-hepatic. But the more accurate term is obstructive hepatitis, obstructive jaundice or cholestatic jaundice. So this obstruction, it may be intrahepatic, that is within liver, or it may be extrahepatic, that is outside of the liver. So the causes for intrahepatic jaundice, it includes primary biliary cholangitis, which is an autoimmune disease, and in this condition there is slow and progressive destruction of bile duct and liver. Second one, alcohol, that just we have seen, drugs, that also we have seen previously. Then hepatic infiltration, that may be seen in lymphoma, granuloma, amyloid, or metastasis. Pregnancy sometimes may cause compression of liver, or you can say it puts the pressure on liver, which may cause the obstruction for the transport of bilirubin. Then there are certain inherited cholestatic liver diseases, which includes, for example, benign recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis, and lastly the chronic right heart failure. So because of right heart failure, what will happen? There will be congestion of liver, and again because of this congestion, there will be obstruction to the transport of this bilirubin. The next one is extrahepatic obstruction. So it includes obviously the malignancy, it is carcinoma. So it may be of ampullary, it may be pancreatic, it may be bile duct or liver metastasis. Second reason is choledocholithiasis, that means there is a formation of gallstone in the bile duct. Next one is strictures. Again, the strictures, mostly the traumatic, will cause obstruction for the transport of bilirubin, and lastly the chronic pancreatitis. So this is all about you can say the bilirubin metabolism and classification and etiology of jaundice. So in next slide or in next lecture, we will see the remaining part, that is approach to the patient with jaundice, its history taking, its investigation and management part.